Hi students, and welcome to today's live IELTS class. My name is Adrian and I am streaming to you from beautiful Victoria here on the west coast of Canada. I hope everybody has had a great week and is looking forward to a fantastic weekend, or having a great weekend for those of you who are in countries where the weekend starts on Friday. Welcome, Nisa. I'm glad you're in your second class with us. That's great. Feeling World with Fried. Monica, welcome, students. In this class, we are looking at IELTS Task 1 writing for the academic IELTS, and we're looking at a Band 9 essay with a new bar chart. While we wait for some more of your peers, this lesson is presented to you by aehelp.com. That's academicenglishhelp.com. For the general IELTS, and to see videos on Task 1 writing for the general IELTS, check us out at gieltshelp.com, which is specifically for the general IELTS exam. So while we wait for a few more of your peers, let's take a quick look at our websites. This is our academic IELTS website here with the blue background. You can click this big red button to join our premium package. We are a British Council IELTS registration center and certified agents. For the general IELTS, it's the green background here at gieltshelp.com. Again, click that big red button to join our premium package. It's a one-time payment for lifetime access, or at least until you finish the IELTS exam. And then if you'd like to use it further, you can. All right, welcome Gliding Waves, Pavan, Akshay. Good to see many members in this class. Carolina, welcome to our moderator as well. Students, if you have questions, you can ask by sending an email to adrian@aehelp.com. Let's get into our Task 1 question here. Oh, just before we do that, so tomorrow we will have a question and answer session for members, and we will have a speaking part 3 for everyone as well. Today's question was sent by one of our longtime students and member as well, Kyber, and I see Kyber is in the class, so that's great. This is the question here for today. Let's take a look. So first things first, when you get to the writing section, read the question really carefully. So IELTS Task 1 writing, you should spend about 20 minutes on this task. The graph below shows information on employment rates. Okay, it means the percentage of people working. All right, employment rates across 6 different countries in 1995 and 2005. So comparing 2 years, 10 years apart, right? So 95 to 2005 is 10 years difference for men and women. So report the main features and make comparisons where relevant. Okay, you've read the question. Your next step is to look at the graph. Just look at it and start to observe the information that you have to write on, okay? So here we have our bar chart, and I had to enlarge this a bit, so some of the text might not be perfectly clear, but that's okay. It will make sense. So on our y-axis, okay, it's our perpendicular axis, or our vertical axis. We have 0% at the bottom, and we have 90% at the top, and then we have intervals of 10%. We don't really need to report on that because that's a very standard kind of axis with the percents. Okay, this bar chart could easily be many pie charts as well, but I think the reason why IELTS didn't do pie charts is because we have 6 countries here, so they didn't want to do maybe the 6 pie charts. I don't know. But anyway, it's 0% to 90% for the employment rate. Okay, so the percentage of people, assumingly adults, working in these countries. And then on the x-axis, which is the horizontal axis, okay, We have the countries. So we have Australia, Switzerland, Iceland, UK, New Zealand, and the USA. Okay. And then, of course, we have the 4 colored bars for each of these countries. So the blue bar represents males in 1995. Next to the blue bar, you have the red bar, which represents males in 2005. Okay, so just keep that in mind that this is what you have here are the males, so the men who are employed. And then the green bar is showing females in 1995, and then 2005, the purple bar for females. Okay, so you have this one and this one being females, so women who are employed in these countries. All right, so firstly, what I want to recognize here, it looks like there's a lot of information, and there certainly is quite a bit of information. So right away, I want to realize that, okay, I can't just write about all of this. There's no way that I can write about all this information here. That would be too difficult, and it would be a lot of information. So I have to be selective, right? And I have 3 main variables here, okay? What are the 3 variables, everyone? So what are the 3 variables that I will be reporting on here? So I have 3 variables, or I should say I have 3 independent variables. Okay, so 3 independent variables. I do have 1 dependent variable, which is the percents. So I have 3 independent variables. What are they? Okay, in this. Yeah, very good, June. So June says the 3 independent variables are year, country, and gender. Exactly, right? So I have to figure out which one I'm going to write about first, second, and third. But before we get there, okay, so the percentage, Akshay, that's going to be my dependent variable. So my independent variables are year, country, and gender. Okay. All right. So before I get there, my first step is to write a short introduction. And the introduction here is nothing more than a paraphrase of the question with some details. So we've looked at the graph. We can do that now. So all I want to do is paraphrase this for the introduction. It's the start to my task 1, meaning that I want to use my own words, and I want to give a little bit more information wherever I can to my reader. Okay? So let's do that now. All right? I'm going to write it, you write it, and then we'll compare. All right. So this is what I've done here. So instead of simply writing the graph below, all right, I've written the bar graph. So Hikmatillo, when you say the given graph depicts, you're doing a bit of paraphrasing, but you're just repeating this. We don't need to say given. We don't need to say below. That's obvious. So just simply the bar graph illustrates, or the bar graph depicts, okay? Data on men and women, okay, in the workforce in 6 countries. Australia, New Zealand, America, Switzerland, Iceland, and the UK in the years 1995 and a decade later in 2005. So I'm right away telling my reader that I recognize that here we're looking at change at the passing of 10 years. So at one point and then 10 years later. Okay. All right. Janelle says the vertical bar graph depicts the percentage of both men and women employed in Australia, New Zealand, Switzerland, the USA, and the UK in both 1995 and a decade later in 2005. Okay, I like it, Janelle. I don't know if it's worth saying vertical bar graph. Kyber says this bar graph provides information about males and females who are currently employed in 6 nations: Australia, Switzerland, Iceland, UK, New Zealand, and the United States in 95 and 2005. Kyber, you have 2 big mistakes there. One, saying that they're currently employers. No, it's in the past, 1995 and 2005. And employees are people who have jobs. Employers are the people giving jobs. So that would be considered a critical coherence mistake, and that would really drop your score. So careful with those kinds of coherence mistakes. Okay. All right, June writes, this bar chart depicts the rates of employment throughout 6 countries: Australia, New Zealand, the US, Switzerland, Iceland, and the UK in the years 1995 and 2005, respectively. All right, June, that works. Lily writes, the bar chart illustrates the information on employment rates among men and women in 6 different countries in 1995 and 2005. Not bad, Lily. Okay, you've got a little bit of added information. You can put a little bit more in there, it will be better. All right, so that is the introduction, and then now comes the overview. For the IELTS, write the overview as a separate paragraph. Okay. In university, don't. Write the overview as part of your introduction. And the overview is your main feature. So when the question says report the main features are kind of the overview. So what do you notice right away? What's the most prominent or obvious information? And you should see that without looking for too long or at too many details. You should see the overview just by really kind of pictographically looking at the image. So observing just the image, okay? All right. So you do have to be logical here. You do have to be critical. The way that you analyze the information, and that's what you're doing right now, is analyzing the information, is going to impact your writing. It's going to impact your score, right? So what we're looking for here are the differences between years. Okay, so the change from 1995 to 2005. The difference between men and women, so the change between males and females, and of course the difference between countries. Okay, so country 1, country 2, 3, 4, 5. All right. Okay, so overall, what can we see? What are the greatest differences? So what do we notice here from 1995 to 2005 in these employment rates? Okay, among men and women. What are the kind of the general trends? Okay. So let's see what you come up with. Name some of the most observable, visible differences. Okay. So what do we notice? Okay. Okay, Ali says the least change is in female workers in Iceland. I don't know if that's the main feature. Okay. Let's see if we can get some consensus. Let's see what are going to be the most popular kind of responses. I'm very curious about this. Okay. Konica, you do not have to give the headings like introduction, overview. Just write the paragraph. That's going to be clear. Okay. Okay, so Amarjeet says employment increased. You mean between the years, right? So there's an increase here, there's an increase here, increase here, increase here. So what you're basically saying is that there is between the 1995 and 2005, more men and women worked regardless of country. Yeah, I think that's a clever one. Okay. Yeah, so Nick Hill says this. Overall, it is evident that both men and women are more employed across any given country in 2005 than in 1995, and males are more employed in Iceland as compared to others. Males are basically more employed than females, again, regardless of country, right? And there are differences in employment rates depending on the country. So I think that is what we observe here as well, right? So let me just kind of draw these lines here. Okay, so those are the other observed. So the main feature clearly is that there is an increase of employment rates regardless of gender from 1995 to 2005, and generally speaking, a greater percentage of men are employed than women in any of these countries. Does that make sense? Does everybody see those main features? Okay, you shouldn't be digressing into the country level at this point. Okay, there's a fair bit of employment. Each country is a little bit different in their ratios. All countries have a lot of employment or high employment rates of men and women. But those are the main differences. Okay, everybody sees that? Good. All right. So let's write about that. Okay. So, and then we can get into countries. Okay, so then we can get into the specifics of countries. So it makes sense to look at the years, look at the genders, and then look at the countries themselves. Okay, you have to have good strategy here, otherwise it's easy to get lost. It's easy to write in a confusing way. Okay. All right. So here's my overview describing those 2 points. So upon initial inspection, so first observation, okay? Upon initial inspection, it becomes evident that employment rates are higher in 2005 than in 1995, and a greater percent of men than women are employed in each given year, irrespective of the country, okay? All right. And then if I want to take it one step further, I can say each country does show a unique proportion of employment in comparison to others in this data set. So basically what I'm saying is that this kind of pattern here, where we have quite a big difference between men and women in Australia, is unique when comparing it to Switzerland, which has a much more balanced proportion of employment rates between men and women in these years. And then we have countries that are kind of in between. We have countries that have higher overall proportions of employment. We have countries that have lower overall proportion of employment. We have some countries like New Zealand and Australia that are similar. We could write a really long essay comparing all of the different patterns between countries, but we're not going to do that. We're going to just take some of the main comparisons, similarities, contrasts when we get to that point of analysis. Okay? All right. So Yakut is saying, good question at Savage Mitchin. Let's see what Savage Mitchin is asking. Savage Mitchin is asking, what happens if we will use the past tense for these sentences? Savage, that's a very common question. Whenever you're referring to the time, so for example, men employed in 1995, I'm going to use the past tense because I'm referring to that year and the employment in that year. So it's men employed, past tense, in 1995, or women employed in 2005, because again, that's in the past. However, if I'm referring to the graph, which is current, and I'm looking at it now, and this graph is going to be the same tomorrow as it was yesterday, then I'm using present tense. Like the graph shows that men were employed, right? But the graph shows its present tense because it's showing that to be right now. So whenever you're referring to the graph, it's present tense. When you're referring to the data itself, especially, of course, when the data is in the past, then you're using the past tense. Okay, hopefully that makes more sense. All right. Okay, Ali writes, at first sight, at first glance, Ali, at first glance, okay, not sight. At first glance, it is apparent that more men are employed than women, and the employment rates are higher in 2005 than 1995. Yeah, very good. Okay. Hung Wan says, if the years aren't included, do we use present perfect tense? Yeah, present perfect you can use in that case, Hung, and definitely using present tense in that case because it's general, the data. Okay. All right. SocioEdu says, overall, what stands out from the bar graph is that men are higher than women in all countries to work between 95 and 2005. SocioEdu saying men are higher than women isn't clear. You need more words there to create clarity. Okay. All right. Okay. So here we have my introduction, my overview. And the nice thing about the overview is it is basically your thesis. Okay, so we're saying that basically employment rates are higher in 2005 than in 1995. So now we want to discuss that further. Okay, so we want to explain what that means, that between 1995 and 2005, employment rates are higher. Okay, so we can see here, just take the first one for example, that you have 55% roughly of men employed in 1995, and then you have closer to 70. So it's a difference of about 14% here. Okay, you have roughly the same difference here, about 14%. So what I'm looking at now is the change between 1995 employment rates and 2005 employment rates. The difference here in Switzerland is almost the same as in Australia. And the difference here in Iceland is roughly the same as well. And here again, we see similar kinds of differences. So there is a slight difference in some of these countries, but they're very, very close. If we did the statistics on this, the standard deviation would be extremely low in this case. So we can just kind of imply that the change between 1995 and 2005, irrespective of countries, so in all 6 of these countries, and irrespective of gender, so whether it's male or female, is anywhere from about 12 to, the most extreme case maybe here, 18%. So we can simply say it's about 15%. Okay, about, roughly on average, it's 15%. Okay, you do not have to break it down into exact percentages for each country. So that would be my point number 1. Okay. All right, and then my point number 2 is going to be the difference. So this is my point 1. My point 2 is going to be the difference between men and women, and we'll do that in just a moment. So first, let's write this sentence, okay, which is the deeper inspection. Okay, Angel, those are some pretty solid scores, by the way. Congratulations. I saw you commenting on your results. Okay. All right. So let's start the analysis. This is the main body paragraph of your essay. This is where you get into the sentence by sentence composition. Okay. Okay, so that would be my first sentence there. When looking deeper into the data, it is clear that the rate of employment across these 6 countries increased by roughly, on average, 15% in 2005, regardless of gender. Okay, let me make this read a little bit more smoothly. There, that's better punctuation. All right. Mary says, in body paragraph, we can explain first 3 countries, and in body paragraph, the 2 other remaining. Mary, I wouldn't do that. I think that would be very confusing, and it wouldn't really create a lot of clarity. So your analysis has to be good. Doesn't really make much sense of body paragraph 1 and 2. Like, why would you explain the first 3 countries and the next 3 countries? That doesn't follow any kind of logical pattern according to the data itself. Okay. Feeling world with Afrid, what do I mean by 15%? It's exactly what I was showing here. Okay. So this is men in, so the blue one is men in 1995, red is men in 2005. This is roughly a difference of 15%. Here again, between women in Australia, between those 2 years, it's roughly 15%, and we see the same roughly 15% on average. Okay, in some countries it's a little bit more, maybe 18, and in some countries, from some genders, it's maybe a little bit less, like here it's 12. But on average, it's about 15% increase in these 2 years. Does everybody see that? Okay. Okay. Kiza, Sandy says, in the data, it is considered that the increment on average of 15% in overall countries is similar increment gap. That's really confusing. You have to rewrite that. Okay. Deepika says, digressing into the data, it is evident that the rate of increase in employment across all given countries is almost 15%, irrespective of gender, in 2005. Make sure, Deepika, that you make it clear for your reader that you're comparing the years in this case. Okay? Kyber, the phrase upon initial inspection. So initial means start or first. Okay? Inspection means to observe or to analyze. And upon meaning analyzing at the beginning. Okay? All right. Okay, so now that we've looked at the years and we've made it very clear for the reader what we see with the years, now we want to look at the comparison of men and women. So how many men are employed and how many women are employed, okay? So we can't write about all of these. You'd end up with too much information. If you tried to write about all of the specific data comparisons with a bar graph like this, you will run out of time and you will write way too many words, okay? So you have to be selective, all right? And here, again, this is why it's so important that your overview is accurate, because your overview will help you to be specific. So here we said the difference between 2005 and 95. We just wrote that in more detail. And now we said a greater percentage of men than women are employed in each given year. Okay, so here is where we can kind of look at the most and the least. So where do we see the greatest difference of employment between genders? So between men and women. Okay. I would say that the greatest difference, you might have to do a little bit of math here. So at first glance, it's looking to me like it's Australia and maybe New Zealand. Okay. So you only want to compare between the years here. Okay. So here you have men at 55. Here you have women at around 27. So it's roughly almost a difference of 30%, okay? And then here you have men at close to 70. You have about 69. And then you have women at about 39. So again, it's about a 30% difference here. Here with Iceland, you have 71 and you have about 41. So again, it's a difference of about 30%. This is why I said you might want to look a little bit closer here. 30%. And then here you have about 52 and you have about 78. So again, you have 20 something, about 26%, let's say. Okay. So Australia and Iceland, roughly the same. Australia, maybe a little bit more. And then New Zealand, you have something similar. So New Zealand, you have 60% here, and you have actually 25% here. So even a greater gap here of about 35% in 1995. And then you have about 41% here and maybe 71% here. So it's again another 30%. Okay. So clearly the difference between men and women employed in these given years, the biggest difference or the biggest gap between the genders are in these three countries: Australia, Iceland, and New Zealand. Does everybody see that? So does everybody see that comparison where roughly the gap is about 30% on average? Does everybody see that? So far, so good. And then by doing that, you can also observe that Switzerland, UK, and the USA are a little bit more balanced. The gap between employment for genders is much closer in those three. So we can kind of say that the employment gap based on gender is similar for Australia, Iceland, New Zealand, and the employment gap is similar between men and women in Switzerland, the UK, and the USA. Okay? So again, you have to be clever. Academic IELTS is testing your thinking, not just your English. You have to kind of recognize this pattern. Does everybody see that pattern? If you do, that's great. If you don't, you're going to be stuck writing some very detailed information that will be a little bit more difficult to disseminate, to make sense of. Okay? All right. So I'm going to report this now, so men and women, and then I can get into some more specifics. Okay? All right. So the range is 25 to 35% difference. Okay? Right? And again, you have to look at these peaks to see those differences. So you do have to observe the data. Okay? All right, let's write that. Okay? All right, so this is the start of my analysis. When looking deeper into the data, it is clear that the rate of employment across these 6 countries increased by roughly an average of 15% in 2005, regardless of gender. Also, the greatest gap in employment between genders can be observed. Now here, notice how I'm using present tense, can be observed. It's present tense in the passive voice, and the reason I'm doing that is because we're looking at the graph. So also the greatest gap in employment between genders can be observed in Australia, New Zealand, and Iceland, whereby 25 to 35% of more men are working than women. Okay. So also the greatest gap in employment between genders can be observed in Australia, New Zealand, and Iceland, whereby 25% to 35% more men are working than women. All right. The remaining 3 countries which are USA, UK, and Switzerland, show a much smaller gender gap in employment rates. Roughly an average of, and let's take a look at that average. So here in Switzerland, we have about, well, maybe 10%. 10%. Okay, you don't have to be perfectly accurate. The IELTS examiners aren't going to be looking at, oh, did they get like 9% or is it 10%? So as long as you're roughly accurate, okay. So again, I can observe here that it's roughly about 66 versus, yeah, about 57, 56. Here I have about 78. Here I have about 68. And I have kind of similar here. So it's only about 10%. So quite a bit less than that 25 to 30. Okay. So Switzerland show a much smaller gender gap in employment rates, roughly an average of 10%. Okay. And that's it. All right. So the remaining 3 countries, the US, the UK, and Switzerland, show a much smaller gender gap in employment rates, roughly an average of 10%. Okay, so now I've explained my main features to my reader in more detail. Okay. And what I want to do at this point is now I want to look at the countries. Okay. So, all right, this is where I have to check myself. I have to check to see how much time I have. Obviously, I won't be able to report on each country compared to each other country because that would turn into like a 2,000-word essay at least. So I'm going to kind of look at the most and least, the biggest, most observable, and the least. Okay. And the most for sure is Iceland. Okay, it's got the highest peak, and Iceland has this big difference as well. And I might compare that to maybe Switzerland, which is also very high, but has a much smaller gap. Okay. And then if I really want to digress because I have more time, I might do something like a comparison of the least employment, which here is Australia. See, we have the lowest peak. It's under 70%. Okay. And you can do a comparison here if you're being quick and clever to Iceland. And then you can also do a comparison to the USA, where the gaps are smaller. Okay. And it's got a lower peak as well. All right. So Iceland is kind of our interesting connecting point because it's got the highest peak and the biggest difference. Okay. Australia has got the lowest peaks and also big differences. So I'm going to start with Iceland, give a little bit of description here. Okay. and then move towards these. Now here, I'm going to be careful. I'm going to pay attention to my time. I want to leave a few minutes to review my writing rather than going into a lot of detail and writing a ton of words. I've made that mistake in the official IELTS exam. Okay. All right. So let's do that. So let's digress a little bit into Switzerland so that our reader gets further insight into this analysis, this interpretation. Again, high band essays don't just report the data, but they interpret the data. Okay. All right, so do this with me, and I'll keep looking up at the chat and see what you're writing and let you know if you're on the right path or not. Okay. So Deepika writes, Australia and New Zealand have approximately double the rate of working men than women in 1995 and 2005. Iceland also shows a gender gap, but a little more than twice. Okay, Deepika, you have good ideas, but I don't think your information is exactly accurate, so be careful. Lepeyan says, how about the biggest variance between these years in New Zealand? The increment of female employment is much higher than males. Yeah, Lepe, that's okay, but make sure that you don't get lost in just that, because obviously this bar chart is showing much, much more than that, right? So here you might choose to do this as a separate paragraph, or you might just link it. It doesn't matter too much, okay? So as long as you have your overview, your introduction, your overview, your analysis, and maybe a summary if you're really going for that band 9, okay? All right, so here I'm going to say, so Iceland having the highest percentage of employed men with over 70 and over 80% in 2000 or 1995 and 2005 respectively. Okay. While Australia has the lowest percent of employment with under 60 and under 70% in the same years for men, right? Okay, so I'm comparing just the unique patterns. Okay, so each country does show a unique pattern of employment, with Iceland having the highest percentage of employed men at over 70 and 80% in 95 and 2005 respectively. This word respectively tells my reader that the 70 and 80% are directly respective of 95 and 2005, while Australia has the lowest employment rates with under 60% and 70% of men working in the same years. Now, I'm not going to write about the women here in these two countries because for academics, that should be clear when they think about what I wrote earlier with this 25 to 35% gap. So they know that relatively these numbers would decrease by 25 to 30% for women in these two countries. So that's totally fine. I don't need to write about that, okay? Hopefully that makes sense, all right? Now, the next one that I'm going to touch on a little bit is maybe Switzerland here, because Switzerland has also very high employment rates comparable to Iceland. But again, the interesting difference is it's a bit more balanced between the genders, okay? So I'm just going to touch on Switzerland here a little bit, okay? Switzerland, whereby close to 60% of women are employed in 1995, and almost 70% of women are employed in 2005. Okay. Okay. All right. So at this point, if I'm really pushing for that band 9, I might include a summary to summarize the data that I'm looking at here. However, there's a good chance that I can get a band 9 just with what I have here. And if I'm running out of time, I certainly will now then move on to task 2 rather than taking more time here. Okay. All right. So this is how task 1 goes. When you practice at home and you do a few different graphs and charts and diagrams before your exam, you practice in this way, you will get quite confident and quite good. Most people who practice task 1 before their official test tend to find task 1 relatively easy compared to task 2. So task 2 is definitely the more challenging task. Okay. All right. So let's take a look at this. Let's review it. All right. Here we go. So the graph below shows information on employment rates across 6 different countries in 1995 and 2005 for men and women. Report the main features and make comparisons where relevant. The bar graph illustrates data on men and women in the workforce in 6 countries: Australia, New Zealand, America, Switzerland, Iceland, and the UK in the years 1995. And a decade later, in 2005, I said latter, but I actually want to say later. Upon initial inspection, it becomes evident that employment rates are higher in 2005 than in 1995, and a greater percent of men than women are employed in each given year, irrespective of the country. Each country does show a unique proportion of employment in comparison to the others in this data set. When looking deeper into the data, it is clear that the rate of employment across these 6 countries increased by roughly an average of 15% in 2005, regardless of gender. Also, the greatest gap in employment between genders can be observed in Australia, New Zealand, and Iceland, whereby 25 to 35% more men are working than women. The remaining three countries, the US, the UK, and Switzerland, show a much smaller gender gap in employment rates, roughly an average of 10%. Each country does show a unique pattern of employment, with Iceland having the highest percentage of employed men at over 70% and 80% in 1995 and 2005 respectively, while Australia has the lowest employment rates with under 60 and 70% of men working in the same years. Furthermore, Switzerland has the second highest rates of employment, comparable to that of Iceland, but proportionally more balanced between the two genders, whereby close to 60% of women were employed in 1995 and almost 70% in 2005. Okay, good. So I think I've done a fair job describing and discussing this bar chart. I probably have about 230 words, which would be well over the 150 limit, and what is needed for that high band 8, band 9. Dirty Duck is asking, do we need to explain each item in detail if the bars are more than 5? No, you don't, Dirty Duck. That's what I'm saying is you will run out of time and the essay will be way too long if you try to discuss each bar in each country on its own. Okay, so you have to be quite careful about that. Carolina, thank you so much for moderating the chat and helping to answer some people's questions. That was really helpful because I had a lot of content to deliver, so I wasn't able to reflect on as much of the students' writing. So thank you for that. Kyber, thank you for sending us this question today. We will have this posted on our YouTube community board. Have a wonderful day, everyone, and remember to get lots of videos and strategies to truly help improve your thinking, your communication, and your score for the IELTS exam. Visit and join our premium package. For the academic, it's aehelp.com. For the general, it's gieltshelp.com. We are world leaders when it comes to exam preparation. Have a fantastic rest of your day, everyone, and make sure to come back tomorrow. We've got a question and answer session for members, and then we will have a speaking part 3 practice for everyone. That's it for me for today. Again, I will be back tomorrow. Much love to all of you wherever you are in the world. Bye for now.